Welcome to Menopause Reimagined. I'm your host, Andrea Donsky, a nutritionist who's in menopause. I'm a menopause educator, avid menopause researcher, and I'm the co-founder of wearemorphus.com. The goal for this show is to empower you as you enter into perimenopause and menopause so you can take control of your health and your symptoms. Today, I'm speaking with Judy Gaman. She's the CEO of Executive Medicine of Texas, author of 7 award-winning books, a national speaker, and the host of the Stay Young America podcast. She's also the author of Age to Perfection, How to Thrive to 100, Happy, Healthy, and Wise, where she interviewed centenarian Lucille Fleming. Now, here's Judy. Welcome to the show, Judy.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrea, for having me.
This topic really resonates with me, and I thought it would be awesome to start off by telling your story about how you met Lucille.
Well, it's a fascinating story. As an executive with Executive Medicine of Texas, at the time I was the director of business development, and part of my job was to work on books with physicians. And we were working on a book called Age to Perfection: How to Thrive to 100, Happy, Healthy, and Wise. And I was doing a lot of research at the time, really diving into the blue zones and places in the world where people live a long time. And then I had this like crazy idea: why don't we just go ask people over 100 how they did it? And that began the most incredible journey of finding people that were over 100 that had incredible wits about them and wonderful stories and great advice. But the one person that I met that just became a best friend, a mentor, attached to the hip, anything you want to label it, she pretty much was Lucille Fleming. I met her just a few days after her 100th birthday.
And what were some of the lessons that Lucille shared with you?
Well, what's interesting is some of the things that she said really resonated with the other people. They didn't know each other. And a lot of the things that came out of those interviews were things that we kind of know. Deep down we know. And in the Age to Perfection book, I also had interviewed people who are children who were in elementary school, and they kind of knew, what does it take to live to be 100? And they said, oh, you gotta have lots of friends. Well, interestingly enough, so did the people over 100. They said, oh, you got to have a good social life. You got to have friends. You always got to be making new friends, because at their age, people were passing away. So they had to make sure they always had some younger friends. And exercise every day. I mean, these kids go, oh, you gotta go to PE. You got to exercise. And the centenarians would say, you have to keep moving. And exercise, the kids knew you had to go to PE. You had to keep moving. They knew that. Somewhere along the line, we kind of lose that as life gets in the way. But the people over 100, and especially Lucille, they all know that keeping the machine well oiled is so important to longevity and to health, and even in our 40s and 50s to our hormone levels. So Lucille doing things like taking the apartment that was the furthest away from the social activities, like the dining room and the places that people would gather, because she'd say, if I don't do anything else, I'm getting the steps in there. And she'd walk the corridor. She'd be sure to get her exercise, be sure to make friends, eat healthy, just things that we maybe take for granted, because we have lots of marketing messages telling us other ways to stay young and stay healthy, and we forget just the basics.
How did some of the things that she shared with you and some of the other centenarians shared with you, how does it relate to what we hear from the research?
Well, thank you for that question, because we maybe didn't need all of these studies to tell us that blueberries are good for us, for an example. Now, Lucille would always swear by her blueberries, and when she was a child, she'd go pick the blueberries. 2 of her sisters did not like them. She ate them religiously long before the research came out that, we need to eat colorful foods, and the more color in the fruit, the better in other foods. And these people kind of knew these things, maybe intuitively. Right. And it's fun to kind of look at the research that has come out, being sure that they're not overstressing or overtaxing themselves. One thing that I thought was very interesting about the centenarians is they all had a higher belief. And it wasn't that they were all the same religion, they certainly weren't, but they all gave it up to God. And I thought that was really interesting, that they all felt that that was really important, not just to their own health, their own stress levels, but to what they wanted to pass down to their children. And I just thought that was so fascinating, because now we have research with functional MRI that when we're in prayer or we're in meditation, certain parts of the brain light up. And they have not found that those parts of the brain light up any other time, but they have found that they do during prayer and meditation. So some great research comes out of things that these people just kind of knew. They I think they paid a lot more attention to their bodies and to how they felt when they did things. We're in such a distracted state with our phones and our computers and our unbelievable calendars, that we maybe don't stop to take our own pulse, so to speak. How do I feel when I'm overstressed? How do I feel when I watch the news? And then maybe make some choices in our life of, maybe this isn't the best thing for me, or I need to limit this, or I need to do more of that.
Was there anything that Lucille or some of the other people that you interviewed or became friends with, did they find that there had any regrets? Like, did they say, okay, so if there's anything I'm going to share with you, Judy, as we get older, these are some regrets that I want you to pass on to others?
Yeah, I think they did. And I'll focus here on Lucille, because Lucille and I mean, we had a very wonderful friendship that spanned the course of just about 4 years, because she died just shy of her 104th birthday, actually 2 weeks prior. So we had a lot of conversations that were very deep. I don't think that I understood the meaning of best friend until Lucille and I were best friends. And we really were opening up on a level of talking about things in our life that maybe were pivotal points, whether they were good things or, like you had mentioned, regrets. And Lucille was very keen on the idea of letting things go. And I think that is so important. So she gave incredible perspective to my life. And I think in the book, Love, Life, and Lucille, that perspective really shines through with the stories about my life and her life and how they intertwine and the things that we face. Because if you really want to get perspective, find someone over 100 that came to the United States with a locket around their neck and a suitcase in their hand. And at a time when women weren't really doing these kinds of things, she put herself through school, and she fought off college boys who had ill intentions, and all of these things of the human experience that she went through, lived through, and made it through these things, just coming out the other side shining. And really, it wasn't that these things were easy. It was all about having that perspective of, yeah, this is going to be hard, but I'll get through it. She said something to me which I thought was quite interesting. And to put this in context, this was before the pandemic. This was before the big elections that happened since her passing. And she said, one time we were talking about politics, and ironically, we were talking about Russia. And this is when Russia really wasn't on the radar. I think Mitt Romney had said something about Russia as a threat, and somebody laughed at him and said, "Oh, that's crazy." And so we were having this conversation about it. And she said the most interesting thing. She said, I have lived a long time. I lived through the Great Depression. I have seen presidents come. I've seen presidents go. I have heard that the world's going to end. I've heard that everything's going to hell in a handbasket in the 60s. I've heard all of these things. I know that people from time to time really thought, this is it. This is horrible. And it all just comes to pass, and we make it to the other side, and life changes. It's cyclical. And I thought that was great advice, that we aren't alone in this generation where we think either side of the aisle, we think that, oh, this has got to be it. This is terrible. How can this be going on? And that has happened generation after generation. hearing from her, even like when rock and roll came and they thought, oh my gosh, all the teenagers, this is terrible. They're going to ruin the country and this, that, and the other. They really, really did believe that. And as we've kind of moved through not just the Beatles and Elvis, but moved through these things in life, we get to the other side and realize, oh, okay, now we're on to the next thing.
Right. So she's saying this too shall pass. So everything kind of has that cycle. Nothing stays the same for long.
Right.
You mentioned earlier about the fact that Lucille let things go. What did you mean by that?
Well, there's a great story in the book, which some people have written to me and said, actually, this is one of their favorite stories. And it was a time when I had an argument with my husband. I came home exhausted and I had asked him to just make dinner. And he's like, well, what am I going to make? And I said, well, I don't know, make pancakes. And I went in the other room and I was decompressing. And about 30 minutes later, in comes my son, my teenage son, and says, how do you make pancakes? I'm like, why are you asking me this? And he's like, I don't know. Dad said you wanted me to make pancakes. And I was so angry. And the next day I was telling Lucille about this. And she really helped me see it in a different light. She said, I was in a different time where never would a wife come home and ask her husband, first of all, to make dinner. Right. And then secondly, be upset that he didn't. You need to let it go. And I was like, whose side are you on? I was so upset. And by the end of our outing, I pulled back up to drop her off and she said, hang on, I'll be right back. And she went upstairs and she gathered some recipe cards. And she came back down. She came to the door, a side door. I rolled down the window. She passed them and she goes, yeah, you should do the sweet and sour chicken tonight. And she said, just let it go. Go home and make the sweet and sour chicken. And I just thought that is such a different perspective. I really thought she was gonna, just jump on my bandwagon and, oh yeah, that's terrible. And I did what she said, and everything just turned out terrific. I mean, it really wasn't worth holding on to. And I later then took those recipe cards and sent them to her grandson. And it was a sweet time, and he knew the story. So I think she literally just had a way of taking the hot air out of things that could really blow up into something they weren't worth blowing up into.
When she was sharing these things with you, was it because it was her experience, or was this her mindset throughout her entire life?
I really believe it was her experience. The more we live, the more we have these experiences, the more we realize what things really matter. She had the unfortunate experience of losing her husband, and I talk about that in the book of when her husband died. And it really, I think, does put things in perspective when you're with a widow and you're complaining about your husband and they just know, hey, you know what? That's so not worth an argument.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
Don't sweat it.
Yeah. And what was she like? What was her mindset like? Obviously, she sounds like an incredible woman. And I love that you're really, her legacy lives on through the book that you're writing and the interviews that you're doing. Talk to me about mindset and the importance what did Lucille teach you about that?
Well, Lucille was 100% about mindset, and that just exuded from her. She would get up every day and put the clothes on that she laid out the night before. She fully expected to wake up. So she had laid out her clothes and her jewelry, and she would get up and she would make a day of it. And I think we can all learn a lot from that. And she'd buy green bananas because she fully anticipated she'd be there a week from now to eat them. And her attitude towards her friends and her family, always making whoever she was around feel so important and so uplifted. And just the way she looked at life, she didn't complain, which was the most amazing thing, to be with someone who doesn't complain. Who could have had reasons to complain, especially as we get older, maybe we're achy. She just didn't. And I remember once when, and this is a great attitude story, we were out on book tour, and she was great. I mean, she went out on book tour with me. We flew around, and boy, it's a lot of fun to travel with somebody over 100 who's spry like that. And I reached over because I thought she was having some trouble buttoning the top button on her shirt. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I was going to help you button that." She said, "Oh no, oh no. The day I stop buttoning my own clothes is the day I start to die. It may take me a minute longer, but I will get every one of these buttons." And she had so many buttons on that shirt. And I really never forgot that. That is so easy to just ask for help all the time or expect help all the time. But the day that we stop helping ourselves is really when we start going in the other direction. It was great advice.
And it being independent for her, that was a really important thing as well.
Super independent. She had broken her hip when she was, I think she was in her late 80s or 90s. I forget when it happened. I didn't know her when it had happened. But her telling the story that she never would have given up her driver's license. Had she known, she would have graduated from her physical therapy ahead of schedule. She says, "I never should have given up my driver's license." And, because she fully expected to still be driving into the late 90s. She just never saw herself as old. I talk about in the book, in one particular chapter, where she wanted to move from the independent living center she was at and go to a different one. And I said, "Why?" She goes, "Oh, everybody here is so old." And but old was the mindset.
Yeah.
And Andrea, it is so much about the mindset.
It is so much about the mindset. And I hear that a lot as people get older, and they say that, it's really in terms of how you look at things. I was listening to a podcast recently on Oprah's podcast, and she was interviewing a Holocaust survivor. And the woman was talking about, she was 98 years old or close to 100. And she was saying how she was talking about in terms of being, your mindset in terms of being a victim or being a survivor. And so I love that, it seems to be a theme for people who are living into, their later years. And I wonder, from the research you've done, Judy, have you found any other, so is that true? And what are some other themes that are, I guess, that you've seen throughout, like these threads that you see in people who are living these longer lives?
Well, I absolutely, the mindset, and hands down. And that really starts at a young age. This starts in the 20s. If we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and we're always a victim, and everybody does me wrong, and we go down that path, that is a setup for failure. But when we take responsibility for our own actions, our own words, our own relationships, which all of these people I interviewed were very good at, then it's a kind of freedom that is not just a mental freedom. I think it's a physical freedom, because as the CEO at Executive Medicine of Texas, we have found, and this isn't a scientific study, it's just we've noticed this a lot, that people who tend to have that victim mentality have a lot of health issues. And it most likely is because they carry all that stress, all that burden, and they put so much focus that it eats away at them internally. And as far as other things that we've really seen in people who live a long time, is that they're not afraid to reinvent themselves. And Lucille was great at this. I mean, she played duplicate bridge. She always was into doing things and being active. And when she went out on book tour with me, and she embraced that whole role, she became a longevity expert. She had a new title. She had a new thing to be proud of. And as we see people that enter different stages of their life, maybe it's retirement, and maybe it's just getting out of being as independent as they would like. If they can find ways to reinvent themselves, look at their strengths, look at the things they enjoy, and then make something of that, they'll always have a purpose. And it's that purpose that keeps us not just living longer, but living healthier and living happier.
I love that so much. And our audience are women who are in perimenopause and menopause. And for so many of us, when they're going through the transition or they're having all these symptoms and they're not feeling really, really well, it's hard to see sometimes what that purpose is. So, and I think for sharing this information and sharing what Lucille went through and her mindset, I think that is so important for us to remember because we all have a purpose. And I think that reminding ourselves what and sometimes we don't even know what it is until we're in our later years. Would you say that's something that you saw as well? Like from interviewing or from speaking to people who were living into their hundreds?
Yeah, I think so. I know somebody really well who became a widow in her late, no, I think she was actually in the early 70s. And they never in her wildest dreams expected her husband to die. And this particular friend of mine did an incredible thing. She took up dancing and she took up concert piano.
Hmm.
And she started from really not knowing anything about the piano to just a few years later playing Carnegie Hall and flying all over and playing for incredible people in foreign countries. And she just poured her grief into a new beginning. And I think that new beginning really healed her. And it certainly inspired me and so many people who know her. But when we're faced with adversity, maybe it is divorce, maybe it is the loss of a spouse, maybe it's the loss of years gone by. Like when we go into menopause, there's a certain amount of grief to that because it's a change in life and we're having hormonal changes and things are different. I remember the first time when I went through menopause and I realized, wow, I couldn't have another child if I wanted to. Not that I wanted to, but it was just that stage of my life was over.
Yeah.
And then we started having grandchildren and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm the grandma. And it was sobering in a sense, but taking that energy and reinventing or saying, this is a time now for me to decide what are things I want to do that are besides going to, band concerts and theatrical things my kids are in and baseball games and all these things that happen when we're younger, when it's really all about everybody else and as it should be. But when we reach that next stage in our life, we have to make a choice. Do we want to just feel depressed or do we want to see it as a new beginning? And I think that the people that I know that have really embraced that stage of life have come out happier. And the people I know that are just devastated that their last child's out of the house and now I'm an empty nester and I have no purpose, and that has not gone well for them. They tend to struggle then with depression. So I encourage everyone to really start that journey or thinking about that journey before you're an empty nester, before you go through menopause. Start evaluating your life. What are things that I want to do? And how would I do that? Or how would I accomplish that?
I call it taking inventory of self. That's
nice.
Isn't that great? So
yeah, that's great.
It's a term that I coined because I do believe that so many of us don't realize how awesome we are and don't realize what our true potential is and don't realize that we have so much to offer. And especially as we're going through this phase, it becomes blurry because we're so bogged down on how we're feeling and we have brain fog and our memory may not be as good, or we're having hot flashes or whatever it is that we're going through, the signs and symptoms that we're experiencing. But as we go through it and we come into menopause, it is, and that's why I call my company Morphus. It's based on metamorphosis, right? Like we are changing, we are becoming into who we are, this beautiful self. So I love hearing what you said because it really is a chance for us as we're going through or as we're in menopause to really reinvent ourselves, to realize how powerful that we are, to spread our wings and to do things. Like I'm 52 years old. I'm starting a new company. Like I literally just started a new company in the last year. It's not too late. And from what you're telling me about what Lucille was saying, like something you said resonated really with me is that she woke up every day. She laid out her clothes. She woke up every day. She put on her jewelry. I'm guessing she put on her makeup. She probably, did something to make herself feel amazing every single day. And it kind of just stuck with me. I'm like, oh, That is such great advice. And it's such a amazing, she was such an amazing role model, because when we know, or we feel a certain way, it's going to make us, produce certain things, right? Or make us feel or do certain things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we also need to be in tune with what is it that makes us feel good. You mentioned Lucille putting on her makeup, and she certainly put on her makeup, but the makeup and the clothes, that was kind of part of her identity. I remember saying to her, that's funny that you have a wig stand. It's kind of like a styrofoam head.
Yep.
I said, so close to your bed. She said, oh, well, if they ever have to call the ambulance, I'm not going without my hair. And I just thought that was so funny that she just knew she had to look good. And that, because that was important to her, and whatever is important to people is different. It doesn't mean that, everyone should wear a wig or dye their hair.
Yeah, whatever makes you feel good, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
She was so inspirational, because when she was in the first place where she said everyone had gotten old, I would remember sitting with some people at her table, and she always kind of had like this table. It's just like junior high, by the way, in these places. It's just like junior high. There's cliques, and there's jealousies. There's all these weird things that go on in independent living centers. But she was with her friends, and they were at the table, and she had stepped away for a minute, and one of her friends leaned over and said, nobody used to dress up for dinner until Lucille came. And then we all started making it an event. We knew she would be coming, so we all dressed up. And I just thought, wow, how inspirational. And we never know how we're affecting the people around us, or the power that we have to positively impact people around us. And I thought that was so great that woman shared that with me, because I looked around, and yeah, that the men had their belts on, their pants, and a lot of them were wearing bow ties or regular ties, and they're just going to dinner. They just dressed up to go to the dining hall. And I loved that.
I love that too. I remember my grandfather lived in an independent living home, and there was a woman, and she was 100. And every day when they come down to eat, she would come down, she had makeup on, and she always had lipstick on. And I remember thinking to myself, and she reminds me, it reminds me of the story you were talking about, Lucille. So whatever it is that makes you feel great is the key. And you're right. It's how, it kind of like has that trickle down effect onto others. Right. So I think that's amazing. But it also, and like you're saying, like whatever it is that you choose to do, I think of myself some days, like there are some days I just want to throw my hair in a ponytail. I don't want to put on makeup. I just want to wear my, my sweatpants, and I don't want to, and I don't necessarily feel great on those days, but when I do my hair and I put on my makeup, so I try to make it more of a concerted effort these days to really put myself, to do my hair, to put on some makeup, to dress up and put on some jeans, and not just live in sweatpants. Because for me, I feel like it makes me feel better. So it's so interesting to hear you say that that's the kind of effect Lucille had on the people around her.
Yeah. And Andrea, we now have some research and statistics that came out of the pandemic, that the people that would get up and have a place like in their home that was set up for their home office, but they'd get up and they would put their makeup on, and they would put their clothes on, and they would act the part, actually did better. They had less depression. They were more productive. And for those who just said, yeah, whatever, and they literally stayed in their pajamas, instead of National Pajama Day, it was like National Pajama Year or two. And they didn't do anything. They weren't getting haircuts and all of those grooming things. They are the ones that saw more depression. They saw less productivity. They had kind of lost their sense of drive, were reluctant to set goals. So there's something to it. There's definitely something to it. And it's, not about the lipstick color. I think it's more about the mindset of just being able to take control of your time and say, okay, this is the time I'm going to devote to this. And then there are some rewards when we're productive, and it does light up the brain. We know that it causes chemical reactions. So being able to produce and then see the fruits of those labors really helps our own psyche and helps keep us young and healthy.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. Did Lucille, since she lived such a long life, did she talk about that the more things change, the more they stay the same? Did she share any stories with you of how, because there's so much change in those 104 years, but at the same time, things tend to stay the same as well? Were there any stories that she shared with regards to that?
Yeah, there were. I think it was funny that she had a cell phone. She used her cell phone quite a bit, and she changed with the times, which I think was really important. I think my grandfather, who died when he was 90, and he's been gone for over a decade now, but he was one of the first people that I knew who bought a computer. Of course, he gathered the family around at his home and said, "Don't touch it." It took up the whole desk. He's like, "Nobody touch it." And I just thought it was so cute that he went back to school and he learned these things when most people were retiring. And Lucille was very similar in the sense that she was curious about the world. And being curious is so good for our health. It's so good for our mental health. It's good for our longevity. And we don't want to lose our sense of being curious. One thing that I found, Andrea, with Lucille and my time I spent with her was a truth about life. And that is that the human experience is really the same, regardless of what generation, regardless of what socioeconomic class, race, all of these things. I mean, it's the same. We all know what it's like to feel disappointment, to have a broken heart, to have joy, to accomplish something, to have a loss. And experience grief, whether that's a pet or a family member or whatever it is. And those things, they are not about where you live. They're not about the language you speak. Those are things that happen. I wish there were words that crossed all the different language barriers, because those are the things that happen in life. And the more we embrace those things as part of life and part of the human experience, instead of, and like earlier we talked about, in being a victim and victimization and how damning that can be to your soul, the more we embrace that, yeah, things are going to happen, and good things and bad things and things I would wish didn't happen, is the more we just say, okay, that's the experience, that's what it means to be human. And the more accepting we are of that, the more we can look forward to the good things, because we stop focusing on every time something goes wrong.
Was there anything that surprised you in becoming friends with Lucille?
Well, in the book, I talk about when I was going to meet her, and she was the first centenarian that I had interviewed, and I was very nervous, and it's quite comical when I think about how I wrote about this, that I was just thinking, okay, what is she going to look like? Is she going to smell bad? Is she going to be drooling? I didn't know what to expect. And when she opened that door and she is dressed to the nines and she lets out this big boisterous, "Well, hello, I'm Lucille Fleming," I just couldn't believe it. I was just like, what? This is not at all what I thought I was going to get behind the door of a 100-year-old. So yeah, that surprised me. And just her joy and zest for life was quite amazing. And because she had lived by her own rules of always make sure you have more friends, and then you do enemies and more friends. She didn't have one enemy, but just more friends in your life as you age. A lot of times when you go to funerals and things, especially at this age, there might be a few people, or they just get cremated, or it's just a family gathering. But Lucille had so many people that she had impacted that really just cared about her and loved her, and it was fun to share that. She was very well known for always having a flower on her lapel and a ribbon around her neck, and so at her celebration of life everybody got a flower, and they all came in with a flower on their lapel. And it was just such a sweet tribute to someone who just touched our lives so much.
Did she ever talk about her end of life? Like, did she ever, you said that she woke up every day, put out her clothes. She never thought, in her mind, she was waking up another day. Did she ever say anything to you in terms of preparing for that day when she wasn't going to wake up?
Well, there's a chapter in the book. It's called The God Story.
Mm.
And it was a very touching, wonderful time when we discussed what we thought about God and what we thought about what it would be like, and all of that. And when I did the audio book, which I narrated, and I had a very dear friend of mine narrate Lucille's lines only. And this is someone who knew Lucille. And we got to the God chapter. And there were a lot of times where I thought, oh my gosh, she really sounds just like Lucille. I mean, it was quite incredible how she got the inflections. And I rarely had to say, no, say it like this. Rarely she got it right. But we got to the God chapter, and I'm narrating this, and she's narrating her lines. And I was like, it was like I was right there. I was back there. And she got the inflection without any instruction, identical to how Lucille said, like identical, to the point that I took my headset off and I had to excuse myself. It was just so touching and so real and surreal, because at this point Lucille had passed on. And so those words had a whole nother meaning. And yeah, I really encourage your audience to, always having a paper copy is nice, but the audio book, it's really special. It's really special because I think it's like you're there. I've gotten a lot of reviews that are just like, wow, it was like I had these friends, and I couldn't wait to go back and hang out with my friends. And Lucille and I used to have this running joke. When we really liked somebody, we had this code, or really she started it. She had the code, but the code was, oh, they can join our club. So if we were somewhere and she felt really trusting for someone, maybe it was a doctor or a nurse, or maybe it was a waitress or whatever, she'd say to me, oh, they could join our club. And then they go, oh, what club is that? I'd have to like make up this club, and oh, we'll have to get you a t-shirt. And it became like a joke. But it was people that she really felt were genuine. And I often meet people and I think, yeah, they could join our club. And I can't really put my finger on what it is. It's just, when you meet someone and they're genuinely kind.
And so you said there's a chapter in your book where you talk about it, but what was the takeaway from Lucille in terms of, you said that your friend was narrating her, like, was there a general takeaway in terms of how she felt about that or what she thought about that?
It was a lot of discussion. She had a lot of concern. Do you think my husband will know who I am in heaven? And so it was a lot of that kind of discussion. And in the end, we made a pact, whoever dies first. And you would think, oh, well, it had to be Lucille. But as people who have read the book know, I had contracted neural Lyme's during that time. And then it was a toss-up, who could have died first. But we had this pact that whoever died first, how we would greet each other. And I think that just became even more special. And then when she did pass away, and it's a very descriptive book. So when you read it or you listen to it, you really get the feeling you're there, the smells, the sights, the sounds, all of that. But when she did pass away the day before, she said to me, I'm tired. I want you to know it's okay. And that gave great comfort, because I didn't feel like she really felt at that point that she was going to miss out, or it was almost like she was giving herself permission, and she was giving me permission to be okay with that.
Do you feel like she's around you all the time?
A lot. Yeah.
What are some
There's
ways?
a chair I call it the Lucille chair, and she bought this chair. Now I talk about it in the book. She wanted to redecorate. And this is, of course, goes with that whole attitude, right? Oh, I think I need to redecorate. Uh, so she bought this new furniture. She bought this chair. She goes, "Oh, that's the Judy chair," and it became like a joke. She's like, I would come in and I'd pull out my laptop sometimes. I'd be working on the book, because the book at the time was going to be about, first it was going to be about her, then it was going to be about her friendship, and then I didn't really fully appreciate how deep the book would be until she had passed away. But she said, "Oh, come on in, sit in the Judy chair." So that chair is in my sitting area, and there are times I just go sit in the Judy chair and I think about her and I think about our time. And sometimes it's like a place to meditate, to think, to just be still and be there. I'd be lying if I said I didn't actually sometimes say things out loud to her sitting in the Judy chair. But yeah, it's kind of neat. I've had a lot of times book clubs will read my book, and then I'll pop in if I know they're going to have a virtual thing or something, or I'll go in person and share like real life things that are from the book. There are things that I have that are from the book, and if it's virtual, I'm like, "Oh, here's the Judy chair," and I'll kind of show them, and it's kind of fun because they've read about these things, and then they see, like, because it's a true story, they see the things that they've read about.
One last question before we go. Did she ever talk to you about going through menopause?
She actually talked to me about postpartum depression.
Okay.
And she talked to me about miscarriage. And the most interesting thing is, I had a conversation with her about miscarriage, and I told her, the difficultness, and I kind of told her the story of when I had miscarried, and she told me, no, nobody really knows this because we didn't talk about it then. We weren't allowed to talk about it. And she shared with me when she miscarried and how it was just the next day was just another day. And I just thought, wow, now we have support groups and books to read and podcasts to listen to and all kinds of things. But it was certainly a time in her life that she had some hormonal imbalances, and she didn't know how to cope with them, and so she just pushed through. But had she maybe had some of the things we have today, it would have made it easier. And then the postpartum depression, which I do talk about in the book, it's real. It's a problem. It's when your hormones are off, whether it's perimenopause or menopause, or maybe it's after the birth of a child or a miscarriage, there's so much that goes on in the brain and in the body, and it changes our life. And the more we can embrace what that is, recognize what that is. I remember when I went through menopause, and I had that, I told you about the neural limes, and that threw me into menopause. At the time, I didn't realize that was what was going on. I was still on the birth control pill, and because of the age, and I was like, man, hot flashes. I feel like I want to kick my kids to the curb and sell the dog on Craigslist, and what is going on? I mean, I was just, woo, I don't know. I was over the top a little bit. And then when that all came to, oh, okay, this is what's going on. It was almost freeing in a way, because I realized I wasn't going crazy, and I really was thinking I must be going crazy. And then, okay, let's tackle this, and what does this look like, and how do I get through this? And then, like we said earlier, the odd grief that, oh wow, that chapter of my life is over, and here comes another chapter. And it was a lot. It was a lot to take in. But I think for your your audience, the best thing I ever did was embrace it. Say, okay, this is what it is. Now let's deal with the symptoms the best way that I know how, and then reinvent is, kind of like that important thing that we need to do in different decades of our life is kind of reinvent. Who are we, and what do we want to make of it?
Yeah.
We're co-creators. I like to say co-creators in our life, and taking responsibility for that co-creation.
Yep, very true. Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you for coming on and for sharing your stories with Lucille. And thank you for sharing Lucille with us through your book and through the interview. Like, she sounds like she was absolutely incredible, and we can all learn a lot from her.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and it's been a pleasure.
What an inspirational conversation. Thank you so much, Judy, for sharing Lucille's legacy with us. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it, because the more you share shows you care. And please leave a rating, because I'd love to hear what you think about our show. As always, you got this, and I'll see you at the next episode.